And so we're recording now. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 7th of our Movement Skill Acquisition Ireland webinar series. Again, fortunate again to have Jorg and Jan from the Dutch FA joining us today, and Ed will provide an introduction in a minute. Just general housekeeping rules. If all participants could keep themselves on mute, and then if you do have questions during the presentation, please post them in the chat box. And what we'll try and do after the presentation is come to you to ask your question. Also, again, we are also going out on YouTube Live. So if you are watching on YouTube Live, please post your comments on the comment section, and one of us will try and ask that question on your behalf, again, after the presentation. So really, that's it from me, and I'll hand over to Ed Collin to introduce today's guest.
Thanks, Ollie, and welcome everyone again. It doesn't feel like a week since we've last been on here. Quick little introduction to our guest today. When we decided on the topic for the Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland Conference for 2020, being the coach-athlete relationship, we were very keen to make sure we got content across the lifespan, and we spoke to one of our close allies in MSAI, which is Mark O'Sullivan, and the first people he suggested was to speak with Jorg and Jan. He said he spoke so highly about their work that sent me on a little discovery about what it is that they do, and it was absolutely fantastic to see some of the content that is online that they'll speak to today. So it was a very quick turnaround from then. I got in touch with the lads, and their response was fantastic and very keen. So since then, we've been looking forward to hearing from them. It was supposed to be in Cork, but it's here. So yeah, you're going to hear today from Jorg van der Breggen, and he's a coach educator. He's a UEFA A licensed coach, and he's coming from the background as a PE teacher in primary school and secondary schools, where he also worked in the grassroots area and in time into professional academy. But his work now is in the football development department in the Dutch FA, where it's about exploring all the opportunities for developing the young athlete. And I think that's a huge part of what we're about in Movement Skill Acquisition Ireland. And his colleague, Jan Verbeek, is again a person from a different type of background. He's a researcher first and foremost, but also works closely with Jorg in the football development department, working across from that grassroots through to the elite level. Again, it's 5 years with the Dutch FA now. So the insights that these guys are going to provide from us today is great, but it's also because of the diversity in their background. As I was saying, Jan is an academic, where his background is in that kind of human movement sciences. So you're going to see things today, and we'll have discussions, and hopefully again we'll see great interaction from you, the attendees, as we've been seeing over the last number of weeks. But it's going to be coming from an evidence-based perspective and a practitioners-based perspective as well, which is key to get that balance right. So without further ado, welcome Jorg and Jan, and thank you very much, and really looking forward to it.
Yes, thanks for the kind word, Edward. We were really looking forward to present to you in Cork and meeting you in Cork, but yeah, I think you guys have created a great alternative, and we've been following this webinar series with great interest. So this presentation today, we're just going to show you all the questions we have. We definitely don't have a silver bullet, but yeah, we just have loads of questions, some answers, but we are really keen in starting a discussion and starting a discussion with you guys. So if you have any questions or you want to reach out, please do. Jorg will kick off, and he will just give us some insights into the Dutch FA. So Jorg, you can take it from here.
Okay, yes, thank you, Jan. Well, we would like to start with a short little piece of history about the Dutch FA and about what our main tasks are as a national governing body. So Jan and I both work at the head office of the Dutch FA. That's in Zeist, nearby Utrecht, in the middle of the country. Well, our organization was founded in 1889, and it employs at about 500 people. And yeah, besides that, of course, we have a lot of volunteers, approximately about 400,000, which are all working very hard at all these clubs throughout the country, just to make sure that everyone can kick a ball every week. So that's very important, of course. So, well, I guess Dutch football is probably best known for some big names as coaches and players, such like Rinus Michels, Johan Cruyff, of course, Marco van Basten. And nowadays, we've got players like Lieke Martens, Frenkie de Jong, and Virgil van Dijk, as you might know. Well, during all these years, we've certainly been able to achieve some international successes, although we lost the World Cup final 3 times, and that's of course a very painful thing, you can imagine. But on the other hand, we won, both the men and the women won the European Championship once, and last year the women became second in the World Cup in France. So I think we've done quite good, as you can say. As the Dutch FA, of course, we have a mission, which is to unite people to enjoy football for a lifetime. So football to love, you can say. This ambition we really want to share with as many as people as possible in our country. So what we did, we developed a strategic plan within 2018 and 2022. We tried to realize several things, and the strategic agenda can really help us to work focused on our goals together. And one of the most important things which is in the plan is that we put the football player in the center. So yeah, that basically means that in everything we do, we must think and act from the perspective of the footballer in his or her environment. So whether it's a boy or it's Virgil van Dijk, it's a young girl or an older man or someone with a disability, it doesn't matter. We believe that every footballer must be able to enjoy the game of football and be able to develop themselves in many areas as far as his or her capabilities can reach out. So we see it as our main task to make and keep football attractive, but also accessible and enjoyable for as many people as possible. And we've got this outlined in 5 pillars within our strategic agenda, as you can see on the slide. And the project which we're going to present to you today fits perfectly in our strategic agenda, we think, because we are also putting the player in the center. So it may sound a bit strange, we can imagine, because after all, I mentioned some big names and the successes. So you could think that we're really on the right way. Well, of course we are. Yeah, we are very proud of that, and of course the clubs are doing a lot of good things, definitely. But we also believe that we shouldn't be blinded by this, because we think it's really essential to ask yourself questions and also question things that maybe seem so common. So things like the system which we have in place, and also the people who are in the system interacting and influencing each other. And we think by looking critically at the returns of what we do and what we have done, and look beyond just the outcomes at the top level, for instance, we think this is really going to help us to taking the next steps. So Jan, can you tell us a little bit more about the context which we're in the Netherlands, and also the structure of our player development model?
Yes. Just to give you some idea of what football actually which place football actually has within Netherlands. So We got 1.2 active members who are playing in an organized way. The number of female participants is rising, as Jorg mentioned, probably due to the success of our Orange Lionesses. And we got a lot of clubs, and again, a lot of teams, and during a whole season, we organize a whole lot of games, and probably had to do also with the situation we're in. We're a relatively small country. We did a study recently which showed that in a 3-kilometer radius from where you're born, you're able to play football in an organized way. So I think that's really unique, and we are really lucky to be in such a position. And just to provide some context, football is the most popular sports amongst children in Holland. And we also got field hockey and volleyball as well, which are second and third. And on contrast, what some of you might be thinking, speed skating is only the 7th most popular sport in Holland. So not really that many children are active, but yeah, we do seem to perform quite well during the Winter Olympics. So if you then take a look at our developmental structure, we have it organized in a pyramid model, which I'm sure many of you who are listening now might be are familiar with. We got a fairly big base. It is our grassroots level. So as Jorg mentioned, we have clubs who can operate fairly autonomous. They can organize it in the way they want. It is for a lot of young children the place to get your first footballing experience. So maybe in contrast to some of the environments you guys are working in, school sports isn't that big in the Netherlands. So it's really the grassroots level who's responsible for the first sporting experience of children. And it runs mainly on volunteers. So luckily enough, we have a lot of parent coaches who want to be involved in the game, and we try to facilitate them with the audience, with the education. If we move up a level, we come to the, if you want to call it, the professional level. So we got 29 professional youth academies, which select players from their from the grassroots level and put them in a talent developmental system, if you would like to call it that way. Again, they can operate fairly autonomous, and they can, for instance, they can start at an age they think is appropriate. And most academies run to the age of under 19, and then there's the step being taken towards the first team. From the Dutch FA, we also organize our own program, which is called Jeugdplan Nederland. It's for boys and girls, and these are actually extra training sessions and extra matches we organize to provide players who are still at a grassroots level with the extra opportunities to still make the leap for a professional, to make it into a professional academy. And again, we have the national youth teams. We start at the age of under 15. So again, boys and girls, and we work with so-called future teams, which are teams that consist of late maturing players who do show some sort of potential, but aren't yet up to performing with, well, for instance, early maturing players. So we provide extra opportunities for them as well. And then on the top of the pyramid, we got the elite level. We got 34 professional clubs in our Eredivisie and Eerste Divisie. We got 9 professional clubs for females. And again, we have our national senior teams, both men and women's, the Orange Lionesses. As mentioned, this structure might be common in the environment you work in, and at a superficial level, it seems that it might be working, because we are developing promising youth players. Our players go to European top leagues. As Jorg mentioned, we got a rich history of players who went on and achieved great things. But yeah, only looking at the top of the pyramid and the players who eventually made it, yeah, seems like some sort of survivorship bias. So there's a great study out there, and I would urge you to read it, that actually says, okay, only looking at the outcome of your system, yeah, it tends to be some sort of optical illusion. So this individualistic approach, which is more or less the central idea to talent identification systems, that you can select from a general population, you can select some players will eventually make it to the elite level, to the senior elite level. Yeah, that might be actually some sort of optical illusion. So we took a deeper dive into our numbers and did some analyses, and we actually saw that this central idea, this individualistic approach of selecting only a few players at a very young age, doesn't really correspond that well with actually what is happening, because we see that the earlier you enter the system, it correlates with an earlier exit. And amongst those players who eventually made it to the first team, we saw an overrepresentation amongst those players of the so-called later side entrants. So players who entered the system at the age of 12, 13, 14 years of age. So this actually got us thinking, if we have this central idea of how a talent identification system looks, is it actually efficacious, or is there some sort of optical illusion going on? And it made us realize that we actually needed to answer these two questions. And for some of you who saw the presentation by Professor Kevin Till recently for the iCoach Kids program, this might be familiar with you, but we really liked those two questions. So actually, who do we grant the opportunities to? And is this pyramid model, is it the most appropriate model in place? And to answer the first question, we don't give everybody the same opportunities. And I think there's a fairly obvious example going on, which is the relative age effect. I think all of you might be common with this effect, so I won't go into the details of the relative age effect, but it basically means we disregard half of the population when we make groups, when we select players. So do we give everybody the same opportunities? No, probably not. Growth and maturation, also another factor which is affecting the opportunities of youth players, especially during adolescence, where we see an overrepresentation of early maturing players. And where do all the later maturing players end up? And finally, I think there's some really interesting stuff going on into the area of selection biases. When we actually assess players and we make an inference about their ability, we are biased in all kinds of ways. So are we aware of this, and can we do anything about it, and should we be aware of this? So if you want to read up on these stuff, please feel free to look into these studies. Just a little bit more on the relative age effect. We are working on several possible solutions to mitigate this relative age effect. One fairly elegant solution is the age-ordered shirt numbering, which is for we know the only empirically tested solution into the relative age effect. It is a study by David Mann, which actually says, okay, make your playing number correspond with your relative age. And when you do this, you see actually the relative age bias disappearing amongst scouts and within selection decisions. So I think a very promising and really elegant solution. Something we've been working with as well is the average team age. It is an original idea posted by Steve Lawrence, and if you want to read anything in regards to the relative age effect and how it really affects players on a very personal level, I would urge you to read this article by the Dutch news site, The Correspondent, which is a very well written story about how this actually affects the development of an individual. But just in a little bit more in detail, if you what you see happening in teams is that by selecting all the older players, coaches, they drive up the relative age. So we actually say, okay, if we're going to work with teams who should be under a predetermined cutoff in terms of age, that means you have to select the relatively older players, but you also need to select the relatively younger players, in which this system can create extra opportunities for the relatively younger players. So again, it's a fairly promising solution. Then the second question, is this pyramid model, is this rigid pyramid model actually the most appropriate system? Well, again, probably not. What we see is that there's an emphasis on being in the system at a very early age. So although we see those later side entrants within our developmental program, it's really hard to enter the system at a later age. So it's actually really important to be noticed and be selected at a young age. But this doesn't really respect the non-linear development of children, of human beings. So having such a rigid linear system in place might actually not be the respecting the development of humans. And some of you might have seen this model last week in the presentation by Mark and Dennis from AEK. And we really like this model because it takes an holistic approach, an holistic ecological approach to development. And you can really put this on your own environment, as Mark and Dennis did. And we are actually in this process now of seeing how this model looks for our Dutch footballing context. But it also takes into account the non-linearity of development. So really interesting model as well. So we have been asking these questions ourselves for quite some time now, and we got these negative answers that we don't give everybody the same opportunity, that it might not be the most appropriate system to develop youth players. So we came up with an equal opportunities project, which it's called, and Jorg's going to tell you about it in a little bit more detail, and also shows how it looks in practice. But basically it adheres to this principle. So we need to give as many youth players as possible, as long as possible, an developmental experience which is the best possible within the resources of a club, within the resources of our Dutch FA, but also in the context of your own country and FA. So Jorg, you're going to talk to about how this project actually looks like in practice.
Yes, thank you, Jan. Yes, so what Jan just mentioned is really what we strive for in our project, Equal Opportunities Youth Football. The project started about 1.5 seasons ago, and in this, leading is an evidence-based surveys, which we, of course, try to further develop through all kinds of different existing and new research. And with the help of this knowledge, we try to inform and inspire our football landscape by showing them the limitations and the possible errors in the current system, and at the same time discussing possible future opportunities. So as you can see on the slide, first of all, it starts with the fact that you have to really have to recognize that each youth player may differ from one another in current performance, and that development is an uncertain, unpredictable thing. So that there is no straight upward line that predicts what the final level of performance of the youth player will be. So therefore, there's no longer a selection system based on early individual approach. So this is the first principle. So there's no longer a selection system based on an early individual approach with the aim of influencing a small group of players. But we rather see a more collectivist mass approach. And our second principle is equal offer and opportunities for every player, as well in training facilities, frequency, programming, supervision from coaches, etc. And the third pillar is creating a safe, inclusive, pedagogical sports climate by fulfilling the needs of autonomy, competence, and relationship for every child. So these are the three principles which are really the baseline of our project. So in this project, we started at the grassroots level to first of all inspire, inform, and also develop a new approach together. And we really started it from the bottom up. So as you can see in the pictures, we've been doing sessions with clubs on and off the pitch, with board members of clubs, with coaches, with parents, because we really do believe that all these groups are essential to create a base of support, but also to secure a sustainable vision, which can be developed step by step throughout the years. So when we are in the process with the club, we think it's really helpful to use, and which you can see in the next slide, a system which is illustrated with 3 radars. I don't know if you can put it up, Jan. Does it work?
It is right.
Okay, yeah, I see it now. Okay, so what you see is 3 radars, and we think it's essential that those radars need to click together, and the better that is matched, the higher the output in radar 3 is, of course. So to start with, first of all, you have to, as a club, you have to recognize at a vision level. So that's the first radar right on top. And again, that's about the recognition of the collective approach. The second radar, of course, when you recognize that at a vision level, you have to go to the next step organization-wise, because that's necessary as a precondition to the possibilities and also limitations of your club. Yeah, you can say, in other words, how do you get as close as possible to the most optimal organizational structure that fits the vision you believe in as a club. So again, you can think of the equal offers and opportunities for everybody. So this is a necessary second step. And after this, finally, you get to the content of playing, enjoying, and learning football. And that should ideally take place, like I mentioned, in that safe, inclusive, pedagogical sports climate, as you can see on the slide right down below. Well, these are 3 big steps we use in the process of helping guiding the clubs. In the last 1.5 season, there were over 50 clubs who already joined this project, and which we are really happy about, of course. And all these clubs, they apply the principles, of course, within their own possibilities and their own context. We think that's crucial. So we see a variety in filling in the principles, and the choices that they make is entirely their own choice. So our role, like I mentioned before, is to inspire them, guide them, and help them in that process. So as you can see, we put on a number of quotes of some early adopters in this project, and that gives an idea of the positive things, really positive, striking things that are happening right now. And we also developed a digital magazine, which all clubs can look into without us being there. So they can follow the suggested steps in the magazine. That's from understanding the concept of equal opportunities, to gather a group of people within the club and form a support base on which the project can be implemented step by step, and again, in their own unique way, appropriate within the context of their club. So what do we see right now? As it used to be often the case that there are 1 or 2 selected teams in every age group between under 8 till under 12 and so up, who have certified coaches and more or better facilities. Things are changing, and I will mention a few examples which we see on the slide. So no more selection until under 10, and next year under 11, and so on and so on. So step by step, clubs are gaining progress. More equal facilities for all the teams, so not only the ones who perform better now. More educated coaches, as well educated internally within the club, and also with the help of the Dutch FA, and so on. So we think the very interesting thing, what is happening, is that there are also clubs that are considering a more, you could say, radical approach, where the standards, perhaps over-organized, structured situation, which we all know, it could be replaced by a totally different situation, by, for example, a fully open training situation on a daily basis, a variable team layout also to play games with. So as you can imagine, in this option, in this possibility, autonomy is a major one, because the children are allowed to go to training sessions every day if they want. So that's a really interesting one, we think. But of course, as we are on our way with this project, we are gaining a lot of more insights, really in practice, what is happening, and at the same time, new questions do pop up. So as you can see on this slide, here are a few frequently asked questions, you can say, but also comments and assumptions that exist with regards to this project. So I'm going to briefly highlight some of them. So one of the first is that equal opportunities, as we call the project, also means an equal outcome. Well, we think equal opportunities stands for equality in possibilities that every youth player should be able to get, and that's something different than the outcome, as in how good someone is going to be, because that's not predictable, and therefore we think caution is really required. A model that produces less or more talent. We think the equal opportunities model doesn't deliver more or less talented players. We think this is impossible to say. But in any case, what it ensures is that every youth player will get a fairer chance of reaching his or her full potential. So we really believe that it's therefore more desirable to take this opportunity. And one of the others is that optimal development only takes place if you only play football with and against like-minded players, the best players. We think that if you take into account the unique non-linear development, which Jan has told us about, of every youth player, indicates that that indicates that these individuals can also benefit from variation in resistances, and those could be higher, lower resistances, and we know that it also helps in developing, for example, personal skills such as empathy, helping teammates, and so on. So a lot of questions, a lot of assumptions, and that means a lot of work to do for Jan and the rest of the team. But that's a really fine job to do. So Jan, maybe you can go on further.
Yes, I will just wrap things up. As Jorg mentioned, some of the next steps we would like to take. We want to gather more evidence-based information. So we are really keen on seeing if we can organize some longitudinal studies along this project to get into touch with people who are working in clubs, people who might have a different opinion. We want to really see if we can make this cultural change happening. So again, if you have any questions, please do ask them now or reach out to us via email. Jorg showed some of the things that are happening with clubs right now, but we are really keen on finding out other creative ways to see if we can adhere to this principle as long as possible, as many as possible, as good as possible. We know resources might be limited within your club, within your FA, but we do think there are really creative solutions you can find out to give everybody the same opportunity and give everybody the same attention he or she deserves. And something that stuck with us from last week's presentation as well, change the language, because language actually precedes the culture. So we are really slowly trying to change the language, and one thing we would like to highlight, it was a quote by Jason DeVos, who's working with Soccer Canada. He actually stated, okay, let's move away from player pathways, but talk about player journeys, and yeah, we really like that quote. And just to finish up with, we think this is a great picture. It was developed by the Dutch Olympic Committee. So the pyramid model, it might be most common, but let's see if we can build a skyscraper in which you can take the elevator, you can take the stairs, you can go up several levels, but you can also come down several levels. And in the end, we still make sure that everybody reaches their full potential. So just a final, for us, a really inspiring picture to share with you. So we're open for questions. If you want to know anything, please reach out, and thank you ever so much for your attention. It's been a real honor to present here in this fine line of people. So thank you.
That was great, Jorg, and Jan, thank you very much. I'm going to kick off the questions, if that's okay with you guys. We've had a couple of questions come in from YouTube. The first one comes from Niall O'Reilly, and he highlighted that you put a big emphasis on the individual as your priority. And he just wants to know if you can provide one or two examples of how your coaches guide youth players, either that being within the football session and out of a football session.
Yeah. Well, I think we focus on the individual within the team. So what we really stress within coach education nowadays is building a relationship between the coach and the athlete, and you should do this with every individual athlete. There's some magnificent stuff out there that actually highlights that the coach relationship is so important for stimulating intrinsic motivation, creating a love for the sport, not only focused on performance, but also, yeah, how was your day, how was school, did you enjoy this session? So we try to build in, as Jorg highlights. Again, I think the self-determination theory is such an elegant theory, and yeah, we need to consider all these needs of children, of athletes, and we should try to fulfill it within the environment we're in. But Jorg, you might want to just give some practical examples of how you would do this as a coach.
Thank you, Jan. Well, I think you already hit how do you call it, the nail on the head, because we tend to look most of the times at the competence part, and of course when you're a player, boy or girl, and you're on a pitch, you want to have fun and maybe become a better player, but it's really important that those two other things which are happening at the same time, the relationship with his or her teammates, with the coach, and also the freedom which they have to make it their own decisions. It's really important to get the total package and not only focus on the competence part. Of course, it's important, but it's not only that part that which counts. So we really try to emphasize on those three pillars when we discuss this with coaches, and also when we educate them. So yeah, that's probably the most important thing.
It is really great to hear both of you talk to the actual child rather than the athlete first, and that being the priority that you guys put forward. I'm going to stay with the questions from YouTube for a second, and this one comes from Jeremy, who's asking, when selecting for the Dutch junior national teams, how do you guard against selectors placing a bias on Eredivisie team players? Or is that something that even becomes an issue for you guys?
Yeah, it's extremely hard. We try to educate our scouts. We try to discuss with them topics like the relative age effect, like factors surrounding growth and maturation. Yeah, but it's really hard. We have currently a PhD student working within the Dutch FA who's doing a lot of research on these selection decisions, and he's actually doing an amazing job just explaining to scouts what is happening when you get information. How do you make a decision out of that? But yet it's not a really fulfilling answer, but it is really hard, because you have to in a way change the way people look at players, which is a long-term process. But awareness is probably the first thing I would start with, and yeah, we are pushing that really forward right now.
Brilliant.
I would like to add, because I think like I mentioned, we started from the bottom up at grassroots level, and I really do think that's the beginning of making possible changes in the future. And of course, it's going to take us a while, but as you can see, the outcomes of like, say, for instance, the relative age effects, that's rooted in the grassroots situation, because already on under 7, under 8, those trainer coaches pick and select teams, and from that moment on, we see that we have the relative age effect. So the highest teams are the oldest teams. The oldest teams are the teams who win the most games, and of course, this is always connected to each other. And I believe if we start at grassroots level by changing the way of thinking and the way of acting, and really get a deep understanding of what the consequences are of maybe doing what they did, then we can really change that situation. But again, that's going to take us a while. But if you don't start at the roots, you're probably never going to change the situation.
Yeah, brilliant. And just a little bit of a follow on from that. In a situation where you find that you may be in a club that's under-resourced, how do you try and approach that? Does the framework still stay the same? Do you still have the same core principles that you spoke about just there?
Yeah, when we talk to clubs who indeed don't have unlimited resources, we are always surprised about the things they come up with. So one fairly common thing, if we look at those 50 clubs, is organize your training sessions like a circular model. So you maybe got one coach who's in charge of the specific designs, but then you got all the parent coaches who are overseeing the different sessions or the parts of your training session. And from our experiences, parent coaches, they love it because they can work with not only their own children, but different children. And that's one way, I think, to facilitate as many as possible, as long as possible, as good as possible, in a fairly efficient and non-constraining way. If that sounds right.
That's great. Thanks, Jan. We've had several questions come through on this platform, so I'm going to switch over to some of those. The first one comes from Sheila Quinn, who's got quite a bit of experience, again, trying to make changes. So I'm just going to unmute you there, Sheila. Are you okay to ask your question yourself? Oh, that doesn't seem to be working through. So I'll just ask, so Sheila was wondering about the resistance. Could you tell a bit more about any resistance that you experienced to the changes that you were trying to bring in and how you overcame that resistance?
Yeah, Jorg, you might want to answer that question.
Yeah, I didn't heard the question exactly, but I heard something about resistance. This may be the most important word in the question.
Yeah, and sorry, I don't know if you can hear me now. Yeah, I think the question was, did you meet resistance in the clubs or even at a level above the clubs, and how did you manage that type of resistance?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question, first of all. A very good question, by the way. Yeah, of course, we feel and we get resistance because yeah, we are really trying to open up things. Also, like Jan told us, explained us, with based on evidence, and the evidence doesn't always look very good. So yeah, sometimes it's difficult to don't feel that resistance. But on the other hand, we think we have a lot of information, and we can also help clubs, not only in theory, but also in practice, to show them what possible other ways are. So we're not only telling how they could change things or whatsoever, but we also really are keen of helping those people and helping those clubs. So and I think in every situation where you want to change things, yeah, of course you get resistance, but therefore we choose the route from the bottom up, and it's also an autonomous one. So if you want to join, then join. If you don't, then it's okay. So we are not saying to clubs that they must go this pathway, or it's really up to them. And we think it's our role to inform them with a lot of evidence-based information, but also practical information, so they can make different choices where we think it's more efficient and more logical choices. But again, there is resistance, but I think in such a change, you can say you really need to take the time, and I think it's really going to help us if not only we as a national governing body, but also clubs who are experiencing it in practice are going to talk the same language as us. And Yeah, we think that's a good way of getting further in this process.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Jorg. Hopefully you're happy with that, Sheila. I'm going to move on to Kenny Carroll, who's got a related question. So it's very closely related, but just probing you for a little bit more detail on another specific number of key stakeholders who have to be convinced. So over to you, Kenny.
Thanks, gentlemen. That was fantastic. Just to ask further about Sheila's question there, and Jorg, you obviously answered it, but like you see a lot of coach education, and like coaches like who are well informed, they want to do the best thing, but then it's very limited if they're not in an environment where that's promoted. And I just think the key I see with last week in Sweden and today in the Netherlands is like the whole board member education piece, which I think, you know, you can obviously tell us like how important it is. I know you mentioned it there, but like I think without that, probably it's not going to work really well. Like, how important is it? It's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for the question. Of course, in the end, it comes down to the people on the pitch. Those are very important because they are directly influencing those players, which we put in the center. But if it doesn't is supported by the board members, then it's probably not a very it's not going to be a long-term thing or something. So it's really important that on a vision level, on a core value level, the board members of the club understand the idea, the principles, and also understand that that maybe, for instance, means that results, whatever that means in youth development sports, not gonna be on the short term not gonna be that good as they were. Maybe, we don't know, but the outcomes on the long run, but also the accent on every individual and giving him or her all the possibilities within the resources of a club. I think that's really important thing as a board member, that you have to understand, and and also and I would like to say and spread the word as a board member within the club. Get parents involved, get coaches involved, and really strongly believe that vision, because in the long run it's probably gonna help you. And if the board members aren't backing up that plan, it is probably going to be an issue on the longer run.
Thanks for that.
That's great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to swap across to Adi now. For a slightly more practically oriented question, over to you, Adi.
Hi, Ed. Hi, Jorg. Thanks for your presentation. It's probably a question for Jorg more. Just really, could you talk about some ideas from the Equal Opportunities Project regards some creative ways that the grassroots clubs are coming up with grouping their players through training sessions or matches or games? Some creative examples, how they've grouped their players rather than the traditional best v best. It'd be great to have some examples you could share with us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for your question, Nate. We see a lot of different things, and I think that's the cool thing of it. So because they can make their own choices. Like I told before, the normal situation most of the times is that let's say, for instance, a team has 8 under-8 teams, and the first under-8 team, under-8-1, gets the certified coach and trains twice a week, and all the other teams, they train once a week, sometimes also twice a week, but don't have a certified coach. So you can imagine that's an issue. So in that case, we see, for example, that they choose to group in those 8 teams into groups of 4 teams. Of course, then it is also divided into ability here and now, but a lot of players more than before the situation was get the opportunity, and the other 4 teams, and that's something Jan also mentioned, get also the same coach. So, but we do see that all the players get those certified coaches, and groups are not small anymore. Groups are becoming bigger. Another example, what we see is that groups are at the under 8, under 9 level are picked, randomized. So randomized on all sort of things, or on where they live, where they at school, who their friends are. So there's one club who has 9 under 8 teams, and they randomized, picked the teams. And after half a season, they saw that the under 7, I guess it was competition-wise the best team, because they won the most games competition-wise. Not that is an issue, but that points out that it's a very randomized team selection. So that's an interesting thing. It's really another way of doing it. Another thing, what we see is that the autonomy is stimulated by giving those non-selected players the opportunity to train with the selected players. And again, of course, it would be nice more than that if there's not only 1 or 2 selected teams in a group, but there are more. But the fact that you give all the players the opportunity and they can show up and they can train with other players of their age group is a more equal way of facilitating it for those players. And one other thing, what we also see is in those age categories, we have several blocks in our season, blocks of where we offer them games in the weekends. And what we also see is that clubs are mixing up teams twice, even 3 times in a season. And so that's also an interesting way to not be in a sort of how to call it, siloed system, especially when the silo is closed and you facilitate one silo better than the other. Yeah, of course you're gonna see differences. So from that moment on, and most of the time it starts at the under 8. So from that time on, it's really about, it's not about apples anymore, but it's about apples and oranges, because there probably was a difference, and the difference is becoming bigger every training session or every game. So that's also something which we see. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, thanks very much.
Again, that's one of those answers that makes me very glad that we're recording this, because I think lots of people will take advantage of being able to listen back and unpack some of the ideas there and give them some things to go and experiment with. Swapping over to Phil Jones now. So Phil, I've just unmuted you there if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. I was wondering, based on the activity, on everything you've produced so far, have you seen any of the professional clubs moving back the age when they select? And alongside that, have any of them come up with different ways they're doing their academies at those really young age groups?
Yeah, so we currently see some academies actually quitting their youngest age categories. So they are releasing their under 9s, their under 8s, and they are looking for other ways. What we see happening a lot is that actually those resources who would be previously being put in those teams is actually going to the region. So the professional academy is actually helping out clubs in their area to educate coaches, to maybe invite them to one of their training sessions. Top of mind, I think Willem II is doing a very interesting stuff There are some very educated people working there. Vitesse is one of them. So we see actually some professional academies quitting their youngest age categories and reallocating their resources to actually adhere to the principle of as many as possible by influencing their region they're in.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to be selfish now, and I'm going to jump in and ask a question of my own, because I know there's a couple of people who are here listening who'll be particularly interested in this as well. You mentioned a couple of kind of educational elements, so the kind of things you're doing to support coaches to put this into practice. So one of them was the magazine that you said was available. Could you comment on anything else that you're doing to provide support for coaches, for clubs that are trying to implement these changes?
Yeah, I think we have several educational paths for different roles within a club. So of course we got a coach education, but as mentioned previously, we also got education for board members, which helps a lot, because as Jorg mentioned, you need to take, if you want to change these things, you need to get your message across the whole club. Of course, in this current day and age, we're doing a lot of stuff online. So the magazine Jorg showed, it was online. It is interactive. We try to put as much content there is available in there. We keep it updated. We go to clubs. We have a fairly sophisticated system in place where in several regions there are people working in helping clubs, in helping them setting up a volunteering program. But yeah, I think we're lucky enough to be in such a small country where this is possible, and where distances are relatively small, and we can influence our region. But yeah, these are some of the things that we've been starting surrounding education. And one other thing I would like to briefly mention is that we are also really those parent coaches, we rely so much on them, so we really want them to get some sort of education just when they start at the beginning of the season, because it can be quite a significant change, having 14-15 kids surrounding you and then having to prepare a training session. So for those people really starting on their coaching journey, we are currently in the process of helping them with some fairly basic education, like just getting them in touch with stuff like the self-determination theory, or the coach athlete relationship is really key.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think some of the things you talk about there about the basic resources kind of tease up one of the sessions that we're going to have next week with Sport Ireland Coaching and keep youngsters involved, and some of the resources they've got, which would draw very heavily around self-determination theory. And going back a week as well, the previous webinar on keep youngsters involved, again, would have a lot of resources drawing from that. We've had a question come in from Miles Smith. So Miles, I've just unmuted you there if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for the presentation, guys. It was very interesting, as it was with the case set up a few days ago. The question I've got is with the, as you see in many organisations that they train players up an age group or play players up an age group. Does this model still encourage that, or through the randomised non-selection, if you like, of groups being performed together, is that not something that's involved?
Great question. I think we see it happening here as well. So try to play players up to get them some sort of extra resistance. This model actually still encourages that, because it is, like Jorg mentioned, randomization is one way, but you can also adopt a very individualistic approach. So you can randomize it, which I think is great from time to time, but you can also really individualize it. So let's see what this player in his or her development at this moment needs. And when it is playing up a level, then you can play him up a level. When it is playing down a level, then you play him or her down. The thing we came across is that there's actually some sort of stigma around playing a level down, but we try actually encourage it to see it like a way to develop other skills like leadership or taking responsibility for your team as being the oldest across your team. So yeah, it's like this continuum where one end of the continuum is full randomization, but the other one is highly specific individualized selection. And I think it was mentioned in last week's presentation as well that variability is key. So don't stick with one way or the other, but yeah, try to work out what's best from time to time, what fits in the developmental phase of that player.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Jorg, Jan, just conscious of time, so what we'll do is we'll wrap things up there. I suppose for people who still have questions, what's the best method to get in contact with both of you?
We've put our email address in the last slide, so I don't know if I should put it up again. Maybe some of you have written it down, but otherwise look it up back on YouTube and please get in touch with us. I know you're fairly involved on Twitter, right? So maybe people can find you there.
Yeah, of course, it's also a possibility. No problem.
Okay. Great, and a big thanks to the both of you for the presentation today, being so open and sharing some of the wonderful work that you're doing in the Netherlands. You know, we've really appreciated, and probably could have carried on for another half an hour with questions. So thanks again for that. From ourselves at Movement Skill Acquisition Ireland, that's the end of the 7th webinar. So you can keep an eye out on our Twitter page at MSAI Ireland for future announcements. Next week we have again really relevant along this theme lined up from Sport Coaching Ireland and I Coach Kids around a presentation based around coaching of children and the changing paradigms in that. So that's at 5 p.m. next week. So keep an eye on our Twitter page for announcements of that. Any previous webinars in the series you can see on our YouTube channel, and that's MSAI Ireland. So check those out, as well as the videos from our 2018 conference. So that's everything from us this evening. I hope everybody has a great weekend and see you all again soon. Bye.